Okay, well, week number 2 in our 7-week fall series. We're working with this book here called Living Originally by Robert Brummett, who's a Unity minister and an instructor back at Unity Institute. And this is a book that is about transforming our lives. And last week we talked about what exactly transformation means. It's a word that we hear over and over and over again on the spiritual path, right? Every self-help book that you see on the bookshelf promises that you will be transformed. And you know what they say, everybody wants transformation, but nobody wants to change, right? That could be a little bit of a problem. Often when you see a claim on a self-help book that says they're offering transformation, what they're really offering is something that's called translational spirituality. And we mentioned this last week. Translational spirituality, as Robert says in the book, is about finding techniques to make your life work better. That's okay. However, there's also transformational spirituality, which is all about shifting, changing our fundamental identity from the personality or the ego to our authentic self or source. Another good example of translational spirituality, you all remember the book The Secret? Great example, classic example of translational spirituality. It's all about how to get the stuff we want. People use it to make their lives work better, but it doesn't get at the problem of ego identification. It stays at kind of a superficial level. And we talked last week about how there is this up-and-coming generation of young people who are leaving church life in droves because they're tired of superficial spirituality. They already get the feel-good stuff. In fact, once Oprah and Deepak came on the scene, feel-good spirituality became mainstream. Everybody's doing it. Even evangelical Christians. Watch Joel Osteen sometime. Tune him in. Thousands of people in this basketball stadium listening to a message that basically combines unity and traditional Christianity with a feel-good message. What we're hearing is that people are hungry for something deeper. All of that is okay. Nothing wrong with translational spirituality. People are looking for something deeper. In the book, Robert notes that for this new generation, self-improvement alone isn't enough anymore. This is what they're looking for. He says, more than comfort and consolation, they want complete freedom, unconditional peace of mind, and the experience of a deeper reality. They're looking for a lot. They do want to take it. They do want to take it deeper. And the Catholics and the Buddhists, they've been offering that kind of depth for over 2,000 years. And primarily it was for monks and nuns and priests, but more recently those kind of teachings, those depth teachings and practices have become open for lay people too. And Unity has always offered a deep and extensive practice of prayer and meditation. We call it the silence. But compared to the Catholic Church and the Buddhists, we're relative newcomers on the scene. We're still developing and expanding our deep transformational practices, and we need to do that. Sure, prayer and meditation, the silence, they're great, but specifically, how do we use those practices to shift our identity from personality to source, to authentic self? This book that we're working with, I think, represents a giant leap in that process, and it's something that we've needed for a while now. Karen was mentioning earlier that we got to spend a day this last week with Robert Brummett at our regional conference. And one of the things that he told us in talking about this book, here's a quote from the conference. He told us that transformation is not about getting something, it's about letting go. The only thing that keeps us from being who we really are is who we think we are. Isn't that the truth? So over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be working on practices that are designed to get us out of the habit of identifying with who we think we are. It takes practice. No one can do it for us. No one can give it to us. And the reason that it takes practice is because as human beings, well, from day one, we have been, how's that song? You've got to be carefully taught, from South Pacific. You have to be carefully taught a lot of things. All of the negative things, it seems, in our lives, we are carefully taught. And one of the things that we're carefully taught from day one is how to construct this elaborate facade that we call the personality. And our culture constantly reinforces the notion that this is who we really are. We need a personality, however, it is not the exclusive definition of who we are. I mentioned, I think it was last month, I was talking about the great Buddhist author and teacher Alan Watts, and he says this. He says, the most strongly enforced of all known taboos is the taboo against knowing who or what you really are behind the mask of your apparently separate, independent, and isolated ego. It's a good book, too, if you want to check that out sometime, on the taboo against knowing who you are. So, think of what we're going to be doing over the next 5 weeks like this, okay? We are going to be joyfully, and perhaps even gleefully, and without the slightest sense of guilt, totally violating a taboo. We're gonna smash it. We're gonna trash it. How does that sound? Does it bring out the inner rebel in you a little bit? You know, we're gonna break a taboo, by golly, the biggest taboo according to Alan Watts. So let your inner rebel come out to play. Unleash that inner mystic, or as our co-founder Myrtle Fillmore would say, we are going to get to work using the truth that we know. So here we go. The first practice in the book is called radical self-awareness. And before we define radical self-awareness, let's talk a little bit about that word practice. Practice means, in the context of what we're doing here today, creating an intention and staying with it. Our intention is meant to be a guide and not a goal. Let me say that again. Intention, it's a guide, not a goal. That's important because setting goals is what translational practices do. When it comes to a transformational practice, well, we really can't set a goal because we don't know what our original nature or our authentic self looks like for the most part. If we did, we wouldn't need to be doing any of this, right? If we knew what it was and we were living it every single day, we wouldn't need any of this. So that's one of the things that makes a transformational practice different. We don't know exactly what it looks like or exactly how we're going to get there, and we can't make it happen. By its very nature, our original nature is beyond our control. So the best we can do is to set an intention, engage the practices, and trust. You know, people have been there before us, right? People have been before us down the path to guide us along the way. So we trust that the spiritual masters who have gone before us on the path knew what they were doing when they gave us these practices. Okay, so self-awareness. At its most basic level, self-awareness is to know that I know. I can look in a mirror, and I know that the body I see in the mirror is me. No big deal. We, I think, share that ability with most animals. I've noticed that our dog Tara will bark at other dogs that she sees on TV. This is interesting. She can be asleep on the couch and some big dog comes up on the TV screen, and man, she's up and she's after it. And she's barking at it, thinking it's about to come in and get us. She's just doing her job, right? But when I put her in front of a mirror, she kind of looked like that. That's just a style. Isn't that cute? Golden retrievers are they're amazing. But I put her in front of a mirror, and she looks in the mirror, and she says, yeah, no big deal. That's me. Nothing to get excited about, you know. No problem with it, right? And wouldn't it be great if it was, if that was as simple as it was for human beings? But what we like to do is we like to add a few more layers to that kind of awareness. So when we look in the mirror, we're not just aware of our physical body and saying, that's me, no big deal. No, we're also aware of this internal me who's looking in the mirror at me as the body. Radical self-awareness takes us into the realm of the internal version of me that likes to comment on what it might be seeing in the mirror. The inner me looks in the mirror and starts with comments like, well, gee, where did all that gray hair come from, right? Or in my case, where did all the hair go? Is that really me? And I really can't improve on how Robert describes the situation in the book. He says this. He says, I see an image in the mirror. I recognize that image as me. I have a mental judgment about that image. I'm getting old. And I have an emotional response to that judgment. Dismay, perhaps. I am aware of all this, and I am aware that I am aware of all this. Welcome to the practice of radical self-awareness. There it is. And I would also say that that's a pretty darn good definition of our experience of consciousness. So we engage this practice by making an intention to be radically self-aware each moment. Are we going to do that successfully? Of course not. As each moment unfolds, we want to be aware of the primary experiences of seeing, hearing, feeling, thinking, and we also want to be aware of the meaning that we are constantly giving to those bare experiences. That means we're aware of the emotional responses that also arise from the meaning that we ascribe to our experience. And the key is we do that without judgment or analysis. All right, so something arises, I feel a sensation in the body. We try to refrain from saying, I don't like that, I like that, it's good, it's bad, it's comfortable, it's uncomfortable. It just is. We notice it. That's all. If we find ourselves judging or analyzing, then the practice becomes to just be aware that we're judging or we're analyzing without trying to change anything. And I assure you that this is much easier to do than trying to describe it. It kind of gets a little bit convoluted when you put it that way, but isn't it interesting? And the most important thing for us to do is to assume the role of being an observer or a witness who is sitting back and looking at the activity of our own mind. We're intentionally creating distance between the observer or the witness and what it is that's being observed. And after a while, we're going to see what's going on in the mind, and then we want to be able to shift our attention to what we're feeling in the body. There's usually a physical component to our emotions, right? We know where we feel specific emotions and specific sensations that we associate with an emotion. One of the examples that Robert gives in the book is someone is talking to us, and what we are hearing is criticism of us. We hear the words and we interpret them as criticism. So we may notice our emotional reaction at that point, which could be anger or maybe shame, depending. And we deliberately keep our attention on our sensations. What is it? A lot of us experience anger as a form of tightness. Maybe tightness in the chest, tightness in the belly. Maybe there's a sense of heat. We feel our temperature rising. Maybe we notice our fists are clenched. Whatever the bodily reaction happens to be, we pay attention to it. And then, while we are watching our sensations and observing what those are, we also watch how our judgment of the situation, or especially of the other person, arises in the situation. What is our judgment? Are we saying, you're wrong, you're an idiot, things like that? All of the things that we often don't notice that are bubbling beneath the surface that cause us to act in ways that we wish we could take back in retrospect. We observe it, but we do not engage it, which means that we don't believe it and we don't dispute it. We see what it is, we continue to be aware of the bodily sensations, and it really helps to remember to breathe. To breathe in this process. Now we can learn something valuable from this experience. What we might see is that the anger and the judgment are really just these defensive strategies that we developed all the way back in our childhood. We developed these defensive strategies to protect our fragile sense of self-worth. And then what happens is our defense strategies get buried in the subconscious. We cease to be aware of them, and yet they still operate. It's like a puppeteer pulling our strings. Or another metaphor that I hear for this is pushing our buttons. You ever hear someone say that? Mm-hmm. Push the button, up pops the anger and the judgment from the subconscious, and then we blame the other person for making it happen. Oh, he really knows how to push my buttons. She really makes me angry, as if we have nothing to do with it. No responsibility. Here's a question we need to consider. Can people or things in the outer world give us a sense of self-worth or take it away from us? What's the truth with a capital T? No way. No one and no thing in the outer world can give us a sense of self-worth or peace of mind or whatever else it is, or take it away. So what happens in this practice is we start to see all of our power leaks, right? All of the ways that we've been giving away our power by believing that the external world and the things and people in it is the source of love, wisdom, power, peace of mind, you name it. We have to deal with the external world, true, but that's not our source. Our conscious mind is conditioned to be almost exclusively focused on the external. We're unaware of our subconscious conditioning, and that in turn blinds us to the source of all good that lies in back of that. And just incidentally, that source of all good also happens to be our original nature. That's why this is so important. So if we engage this practice over time, there are three things that can happen. And I call this 3 ways this practice supports transformation. And notice these are not goals, okay? You know, the problem with the goals are great. That's not what this practice is about. But what do you do when you set a goal and you figure that you've achieved that goal? What do? Check it off. Scratch it off. I'm done, right? We're never done with this practice. So here's 3 things that can happen by engaging this practice. Number 1, we're going to gradually stop projecting our subconscious reactions and judgments and defense strategies out onto the external world, and the external world then loses its power over us, which it never had in the first place, but that's an important thing to learn. Number 2, we become more aware of the contents of the subconscious, which can bring about healing of those things. Whatever it was that caused us to develop those defense strategies, maybe we can get back to that and heal that, whatever it was. Number 3, we become more aware of the true source, the ultimate source of all that we need, which is not the external world that we're so accustomed to looking for. And what Robert has a great summary line here. He sums it up this way. He says, we see the world and the people in it in a more realistic and creative way. No longer seeing the world as a place that can save or destroy us, we see it as a field for our creative expression. Isn't that interesting? Instead of treating it as an enemy or something to be conquered or gotten through or whatever, it's a field of our creative expression. And just a few words here on some of the pitfalls that we might encounter, some of the difficulties or challenges that we might encounter in this particular practice. In the book, Robert uses the Buddhist terms far enemy and near enemy to describe the challenges, the perils, and the pitfalls. The far enemy is something that is the opposite of this practice. So if the practice is radical self-awareness, the far enemy is, the opposite of that would be spacing out, falling asleep. And the best way to deal with that is to have a clear intention that we're going to engage the practice so that we're going to wake up and come back to the practice as soon as possible once we become aware that we're spacing out. And when we're spacing out, we don't berate ourselves. We don't say what a lousy meditator you are or anything like that. We just say, spacing out, bring our attention back to the moment and begin to notice again all the things that are arising from moment to moment. Now the near enemy is a little bit more tricky. The near enemy is something that looks like the practice, but it really isn't. It's a counterfeit, it's a fraud. It's harder to recognize, but one of the examples I can give you of a near enemy of radical self-awareness is self-improvement. The practice is transformation, not self-improvement. We don't want just a new and improved version of our old self. We want to be on the lookout for any sense of trying to get somewhere or to accomplish something. There's no prize, there's no finish line, there's no goal that we check off as if we've arrived and done our work. When that happens, the near enemy is running the show. When we think we've arrived, the near enemy is running the show, and as far as I can see, the near enemy is simply what? The personality or the ego in disguise, trying to hang on. All right, so our intention is to engage this first practice during the coming week and beyond. It really is foundational for the other 4 practices that are going to follow. And the first place to start, first of all, is to go online. I've given you a link in the handout that's in your bulletin. If you didn't get one, there are more available at the back of the room. There's a link that you can go to. It's unitybooks.org/living. And by the way, if you don't have internet access, talk to me. I can give you the material that he has online. We can put it on a CD for you to use. But the reason it's important is because what Robert has done at that website is he's given a meditation for each one of the practices that we're going to be working with. So, if you're new to meditation, or if you'd like a guided meditation that will help you to get into this practice, similar to what Karen was leading us through earlier, except it's about 15 minutes long, go to the website, listen to the meditation, let Robert guide you through how to engage in a formal practice of radical self-awareness. That's the formal practice where you set aside some time every day to practice. And in this case, it is a form of meditation. And it's a great way to start using Robert's guide. And maybe after that, then you can set aside your own time and sort of internalize the instructions and make that your formal practice. And then there's also some instructions for how to do this as what he calls a general practice, where you go through your day and how to use the activities of daily living as a way to engage in self-awareness. And again, those instructions are in the handout that we've given you in your bulletin. I'm not going to lead you through them today. You can work with them during the week. Just a word of caution, by the way, don't try implementing these practices while you're driving, operating machinery, or using power tools. And if any questions or challenges come up during the week, write them down. It's always good to keep a journal when you're beginning to get into a new spiritual practice, just to keep track of what's up for you, any challenges, and that way when we get together in our sessions, our discussion sessions after service on Sunday, we can talk about it. This way we have a support group that can help us reinforce our practice during the week. And we're going to be doing that after the service today. I believe at 11:30 we'll be meeting back in the teen group to kind of kick things off. So that is always available. Everyone is welcome. Bring your questions, bring your comments. We can discuss the material and really get this thing rolling. So that's the practice for this week, radical self-awareness. And next week we'll be working on self-acceptance. So may your lives go well this week, and may your practice go well. We'll see you next time.